context of grabbing and taking away the offerings. Okay, so this is the first part of the question. So with a Reki, and this term Reki means person. A Rekitu would mean people. And the term Reki is related to the type of person. So you can be a Reki you can be a Reki who is an initiate, but you can be a Reki who is a common person. Depends upon what level that you're at. So this person is talking about, can be assumed he's talking about common people, people who are not initiates. And the Aku are the enlightened beings. And the Aku are people who have metaphysically discovered their higher spirit nature through direct mystical experience. So you don't become an Aku. I have to fix my posture. You don't become an Aku because of age, that you're an older person or anything like that. It's an experience that you have that qualifies you to be referred to as an Aku. And that experience, when you have it, it needs to be verified by your spiritual teacher who has already had the experience and can verify it for you. And then you'll be an Aku, you'll be a shining spirit. You would have discovered your shining spirit nature. So keep in mind that these precepts were written to correct behavior in society, in the culture. And so indeed, people were taking offerings. And it's not only the common people that this is referring to, but it's also referring to the Reki Buddha, the spiritual practitioners. So it's kind of a directive that this is not something that is to be done. You're not to take away the offering from the altar, and you're not to mess with the offering implements, such as the incense holder, the incense itself, the libation vessels. So you can't take those things out of the temple and take them home. They have to remain in the temple. And you can't remove the bread and things like that. And you can't be going into the storage rooms where the offerings, the offering implements they were stored in certain areas within the temple. And the food offering would not be, anything that is biodegradable would not be stored in the temple in that way. But anything that is related to the offering should not be stolen, should not be taken away, should remain in its place designated by the priests and priestesses. And some of these precepts emerge during the intermediary periods where people were coming into the temples and doing things that they should not have been doing. So the intermediary periods are the periods where there's a dip in the social order. And I think there were 3 or 4 of them. And so these are, directives, not to go against, not to breach these, the sacrificial items in the offering food. how does this translate into present day life? So in present day life, and you have to think that taking away the offering also means not performing the offering in a proper manner and not stealing the offering. Like we were explaining last time, if the offering is not performed, the the uh, the gods and goddesses, the divinities, would not be around, and they wouldn't be coalescing or congregating in the space because the offerings are not being given. And the offerings to the divinities and the aku are symbolic offerings or gestures of surrender to the divine. So when you're giving the offering, it's a surrender. There's also a mystic participation with the divinity. And that's why, yes, you consume the offering fruit when the ritual is over. The divinity consumes the more subtle aspect of the offering, and you consume, because you're consuming it with your physical body, you consume the more gross aspect of it. So you're eating the fruit, the pulpy, hard aspect of the fruit, but the divinity consumes the more subtle aspect of the fruit, uh, the subtle aspect that cannot be consumed by the physical body. So there's a mystic participation between you and the divinity. When you're eating the fruit offering, you have essentially shared a meal with the divinity. And so you can also engage in a mystic participation with the sages, with the aku, the enlightened beings. And this is why in ancient Egyptian Kemetic civilization, the idea of ancestor worship is not one of like your grandmother, your grandfather, normal people. It's more of the venerated ancestors. The venerated ancestors are those ancestors that have achieved enlightenment, and they could be blood relative members of your family, or they could be non-blood relative members of your family. They're venerated ancestors. So the ancestor worship is not just to any ancestor. It is to the ancestor that has achieved spiritual illumination, and those are the aku. So you're sharing, in the context of the offering, you're sharing a meal, you're engaging in a mystic exchange and a mystic participation with those higher enlightened beings, and not just with anybody. Is that if you engage, if you try to conjure an ancestor who is not an enlightened being, you're going to have a lower experience through that ancestor. Because that ancestor will not be able to elevate you beyond where they have been, where they are. So you can be elevated by someone who is not themselves elevated. But if you go to the aku, there are certain subtle effects, subtle metaphysical effects that take place that will allow for a more propitious experience from the perspective of spiritual evolution. So if you want to engage with a higher, a higher ancestor, means you're engaging with higher power. So not because someone just lived and died doesn't necessarily mean they have higher power. They have, if they are around, if they have not reincarnated, and they're existing in their ka body, they have higher power from that respect, from the perspective of the dynamism of your ka body. But it doesn't mean that their ka body is illuminated. It just means that they're existing in their astral body. And by virtue of the astral field, the duat, the astral body is more powerful than your physical body. You right now, your astral body is more powerful than your physical body. And you can do things with your astral body that you cannot do with your physical body. For example, like Simone Biles, everything that she can do with her physical body still doesn't compare to what she can do with her astral body. However, she suffers from depression, she has anxiety and all of these kind of things. And those emotions and feelings are locked in her astral existence, in her mind. And so when she's having an astral experience, or when she dies and she has an astral experience, that astral experience is going to be through, though if it hasn't been cleared out before the death, it's going to be through those negative, like the emotional states and conditions. So if you go to those ancestors, you're going to be engaging with those negative emotional states and feelings. Yeah, and also with the positive ones. But because there's mixture, there's impurity. If you engage with the Aku, the higher astral beings, these are the illuminated beings that are on the upper echelon or the upper region of the Dua, you're engaging with essentially spirit consciousness that is localized, and that those are the powerful ancestors. So you get, and you have a few of them. You have like Akhenaten, you have Seti Ua, you have Una, Steady, Pepa, highly evolved spiritual beings. And those are the ancestors to call upon, to venerate for higher power. And if you take away the offerings from them, then you don't gain the benefit. So, but if you give them the offerings, you gain the benefit. If you want to go that way, that route, because you don't know where, it's been so many thousands of years now, you don't know where they are. So you don't know if Akhenaten has already dissolved in the absolute, or Seti. And there's ample evidence that Seti is, Seti Ua is completely absorbed in the infinite, in the nebular. And so that gets to the last part of the question. We'll get there. Is this where you referred to? What I was talking about here is that that is a negative offering. So you have your positive offerings, which are your offerings to the gods and goddesses in the way that we have been taught. But for people who don't do those positive offerings, they're going to find themselves doing different kinds of offerings. Because by virtue of being a human being, you have to give yourself to something. That's how the human construct works. That's how it operates. So either you're going to be giving yourself to the gods and goddesses, or you're going to be giving yourself to other kinds of divinities. So in essence, when people are lining up for Black Friday and all these kinds of things, that's a kind of worship. But they're worshiping material objects with no deep sense of spiritual connection. So the the Jordan sneaker has become an object of veneration, and in essence becomes the god, or the divinity. The video games becomes the divinity, and you see what that brings about. So, and that pushes you more into the world, more into materialism. And by materialism, I mean the material apprehension of reality. And what I mean by that is that you conjure through the unconscious that the object has some form of absolute reality quality to it. So instead of seeing the sneaker or whatever the object is, instead of seeing the object for what it really is, the mind construes the concept that the object is a reality, that the object is worthy of veneration. When upon close examination, the object is actually illusory. And that's why when you're giving positive offerings to the gods and goddesses, you can transcend the gods and goddesses because you are taught how to do that and essentially discover that you are one of those gods and goddesses. The text speaks about that and leads you to that realization. So if you're going out, lining up to buy your sneaker or whatever, that's like a pilgrimage. But it's a pilgrimage to an object that you're ascribing some purpose to. And what happens, like human beings cannot live outside the sublime. So something would have to, a human being would have to make something sublime. So for some Americans, it's the gun. The gun is now sublime. The gun is the object of veneration. For some, it's the sneaker. For some, it's the video game. For some, it's the celebrity. For some, it's the sports star. Something has to be made sublime. Because the reason why is because essentially you are divine. But if you don't know that, if you don't understand that, if you're living in an amystical culture, the inner movement or the inner aspiration for union with something more, something higher, something sublime, something transcendental will lead you out into the world searching for it. And you're going to, Michael Jordan is going to become your God, or Barry Bonds is going to become your God, or one of the Williams sisters is going to become your goddess. You're going to ascribe that notion of divinity onto something. You're not going to call it a divinity, but the way how you're acting in relation to it means that you are putting it in a position in your personality that is causing it to receive an aspirational kind of movement from you towards the object. So the object becomes a locus of your envy. You want to be like that person. You want to act like them. You want to operate like them. And that's a whole negative movement. And so in a way that is taking the offering, you're taking the offering from the divinity and you're giving it to the world. And the divinity is going to say, okay, you want to give the offering to the world? Then have it. Now, when you give the offering to the world, you have to accept what the result of that will be. So, yep, so pain and suffering, misery. So think about it. You give your veneration to a sports athlete, and then he gets found out, for taking drugs, or he gets killed, or she gets killed, or the person dies, or whatever. If something bad happens, because something bad is always going to happen, because that's how the world is, and that is the true divinities showing you that your adopted divinity is an illusion. So that's Nebuchadnezzar coming in and showing you that your sports star is an illusion. You need to start venerating what is true as far as divinity. So that's how people operate. And when you venerate objects, those kinds of objects, invariably what develops in the heart is envy. And where there's envy, there's going to be negative afflictive emotions, strong ones such as anger. You see how people act when in soccer, especially. You see this in Europe and in South America. When a soccer team loses, riots happen, riots start. And it's because they're giving their attention to a divinity whose the result is envy, and the result is anger and strong negative emotions. So a human being cannot help but give itself to something, but offer to something. When you walk into someone's house and they have the sports memorabilia all over the wall, that is a shrine. That is actually an altar. But it's an altar to what? That is the issue. Now, and that is the great failure of Western society, Western culture. What did they do? They closed down your temples. The Christians did this with Justinian and the Roman emperors who converted to Christianity. They closed down your temples. They kicked out your priests and priestesses. So now there's no more mysticism. Then they force on you faith-based religion. And in faith-based religion, it is not a path that leads to a spiritual evolutionary process of the human being. It keeps you on the level of faith, waiting for something to happen in the future, just pray on it, things of that nature. So now you're pitched into a secular society where there's a separation between church and state. You have nowhere else to go, actually. Either you're going to go into the church, and because there's no mysticism, you're going to defile the church. You're going to touch boys or rape girls or whatever. Something bad is going to happen because there's no mysticism. Or you're going to create other gods for yourself and goddesses. These are going to be your celebrities, your sports stars, your politicians, the people that are supposed to be prominent in society. And what all of that leads to is the same pain and suffering and misery. So you have to take the ritual or the human proclivity to giving up offerings to something other. You have to take that to the gods and goddesses, or you have to take that to the Aku. You have to take it to something of a higher spiritual nature. Now, referring to Nebuchadnezzar. This is a very important question, actually. Our Ma'at Ari is in a way an offering. Okay, so that is a statement that's made, and that is a truth. I would consider that a true statement. Okay, what other ways can I make offerings to Nebuchadnezzar? If it cannot be a physical item, then what would a transcendental offering look like? It's a very important question. So what does Nebuchadnezzar mean? Neb, al, encompassing, Jur. So Nebuchadnezzar, all-encompassing divinity. Nebuchadnezzar, Lord of the utmost limits. So all-encompassing and utmost limits means that what we are referring to as Nebuchadnezzar is essentially nameless and formless. And we're only calling it Nebuchadnezzar because we have to work with human language. We can't say and not use language. We have to call it something. And in the ancient Egyptian language, Nebuchadnezzar is a descriptor of a transcendental reality. The term Nebuchadnezzar is a descriptor. It's not really a name. Like a Set is a name. Sar is the name of a divinity. They're descriptors also, but they're descriptors of metaphysical states and conditions or metaphysical aspects. Nebuchadnezzar does not indicate anything metaphysical. It is a descriptor of something that cannot be described in human language, that cannot be captured or apprehended with human language. It is transcendental of all name and all form. And therefore, and Sage Abamun wrote about this extensively when Porphyry, his Greek student, asked him about worship and transcendental worship. Since Nebuchadnezzar is transcendental, giving Nebuchadnezzar the offering of incense, of oils, of libation, whatever, has no effect. It has no effect because you're offering something physical to something that is transcendental. And what is transcendental cannot be offered to with physical objects. Is that offering is not subtle. It does not have the required subtlety to have an effect on Nebuchadnezzar, or to have, or for Nebuchadnezzar to receive that offering. So Nebuchadnezzar cannot receive physical offerings. Nebuchadnezzar is so transcendental, is so beyond, is so abstract that no word can touch it, no ear can hear it, no offering can appease it. It is the supreme stillness of spirit. So what other ways can I make offerings to Nebuchadnezzar? If it cannot be a physical item, then what would a transcendental offering look like? Through the meditative process of a human being, when you discover that you are essentially not a human being at all, but you are essentially a divinity. Through spiritual evolution, you can rise yourself to the level of one of the gods and goddesses. You can rise yourself to the level of a Set or Ptah or Sekhmet. And since all of these gods and goddesses are essentially permutations, they're all rooted in Nebuchadnezzar. So from the transcendental, from the formlessness comes form. So form is derived from formlessness. And so all of the gods and goddesses are rooted in that formlessness. It's like, you remember when we used to go to the amusement park and used to go in the bumper cars. And a bumper car, you have, in the back, you have a metal that touches the top where the electricity is that powers the bumper car that you drive around. So in that analogy, the bumper car is the divinity. And the metal that's touching is the connection. And what is touching is the transcendental. So all of these bumper cars are manifestations of that transcendental reality. So all of the goddesses and gods are manifestations of that transcendental reality, but rooted in it, connected to it. So if you discover that you are essentially one of those gods and goddesses, then you too are connected to that transcendental divinity. And since you are essentially rooted in that transcendental reality, and the gods and goddesses have emerged from that, it means that you too have emerged from that transcendental reality. And this is philosophy, but this is what happens. This is what is to be discovered by the spiritual aspirant. This is something that you are to realize. And realization of this is called spiritual enlightenment. Spiritual enlightenment is referred to as Makeru, true of speech. And so if you are, as one of those gods and goddesses, rooted in that transcendental reality, if you were to go to the source of your temporal existence, meaning your temporal existence, your existence as a divinity, and the existence of all of the divinities are temporal. They have to be by virtue of their existence in a realm or a plane of existence that is not transcendental. So only the transcendental is beyond temporality. Anything else is temporal. So by virtue of your connection to that, your temporal existence is connected to that. If you are to trace and go back to your origin, where you have emerged from, you would realize that you are that transcendental reality. That you and that transcendental reality are one. And saying it are one is kind of not getting to it either. It's like you are that transcendental reality. And therefore, in meditative absorption, when you enter into profound meditative states and you're ready for it, and you dissolve into that, you go to the edge of the abyss, and from the edge of the abyss, you merge yourself into that transcendental reality. When you merge yourself into that transcendental reality, that is the transcendental offering. And that is the only offering that you can give to Nebuchadnezzar. When you transcend, when you yourself transcend all temporality, and therefore you're giving your higher temporal nature to Nebuchadnezzar to discover the essence of Nebuchadnezzar, which is transcendental, unformed reality. That's the transcendental offering. Anything else is not a transcendental offering. It is an offering to the gods and goddesses of form, of objectification, which are necessary. And that's what the temples are there for, to control the mind, to purify the heart, to operate the temple. But essentially, if you want to perform a transcendental offering, then you yourself have to merge within the absolute. And when you merge into the absolute, that is the highest offering that you can give. And after that, there's no more offering. Yeah, so how can you offer to something that you essentially are? Since there's no separation, there can be no offering. Okay, so I hope I treated your questions. And these are important questions. And as a community, the spiritual community, these things should be shared amongst us. Okay, if you have any questions, you can email them, because we've been up since 5:30. Okay, dua everyone. Once again, dua for joining us. And remember, next month, September 10th, we're having the Tutankhamunn lecture series where we're actually going through the hieroglyphs of the tomb of Tutankhamun, where we'll also reveal the throne seat of Tutankhamun. It'll be very, very wonderful. And you can sign up for that if you go to the Facebook, Sehu Khepera Ankh. The link is there to the website to sign up. It's very affordable. Okay, dua everyone. Till we meet again. Hetep.
Dua, Hetep.
And Neil, send out a recording of this class. It's